if we believe that behavior, personality, all these ideas are valuable, they're certainly valuable then in the business setting as well. And we ultimately, regardless of the enterprise setting, are dealing with other humans. Our customers are always going to be humans, or there's going to be a human somewhere along the chain that's ultimately the customer. And so if we want to try to understand that human better, then it follows that you might want to understand behavior of that human or personality of that human better. And so how would you then go about doing that? One way would be to interview every single one of your customers or meet with them on a frequent basis, and over the course of time develop a relationship and understand their personality, right? Because that might be useful to you in your business, or let's say you're in banking or financial services. That's an important component of that interaction with your customer. But what if you try to do it at scale, and all of a sudden that becomes a more difficult thing? And there's been varied approaches, certainly work that's been done along these lines. And good examples are like the ones you mentioned. Spotify recommends you music that you may like based on some machine learning capability that detects what might be appropriate, or Netflix does a similar thing with respect to movies and shows and whatnot. But what if you were trying to do this at scale in a banking setting? And so what data, what evidence would you potentially consider in order to determine or detect somebody's personality if you were to try to do this at scale? And so that is the spirit of how this algorithm and this artificial intelligence capability is built. And it's a model that then, and in fact, tries to do that by looking at the thing that is most persistent about a person, which is we all spend money, or we all interact with money in some way. We receive money from what we do as a profession, and then ultimately we spend it. And so the question then becomes, can you detect personality by looking at those transaction or money patterns?
Just before you go on to that, why do you want to understand someone's personality, though?
If we believe that a personalized experience is critical to customer engagement or is a desirable improvement in the customer engagement space, then we need to personalize in some way. And personality is an important dimension for us to personalize all of those different things.
Let
From,
me let
yeah.
me ask that question to Jay then, because I think very much your background on your LinkedIn profile, it says you're a computational social scientist and technologist, which I still am not 100% sure what it means, but you'll give us some flavors in a minute. But what I'm particularly interested in is this idea of personal. Here's me, Colin. I've just actually had an experience with my bank where they've been very frustrating. My initial thought process is that if you just give a good user journey, if you just go and know a little bit about me from my static data, and you go and do that in a relatively efficient, frictionless way, I'm going to be happy, and millions of other people will be happy. And therefore, why do you need to personalize it any further to think about me as a specific individual? It just doesn't make sense yet for me about where's the benefit from that. I think you've got a different view.
Yeah, I think that the view for us is that if you had to think of the deliberate world around us and the way we describe the world around us, if you had to look at the computer screen in front of you, the table that you're sitting at, or the chair that you're sitting on, or the room that you're in, or whatever that might be, we have got to know the physical world that is a well-described, articulated environment that can be measured and understood in various forms. The challenge is when you deal with how those interactions eventually play out using these environments. So if you in a room and you decide in the moment to order something online, or you get up from that chair to drive to the local restaurant to buy a meal, or to perform any other action for that matter, there's a relationship between your real world experience and how you essentially use your economic transactions, your financial transactions, to leave a trail of evidence of all of the things that you really think and that you really believe in. So in computational social science, and maybe just to give everybody a glimpse of the difference between the social sciences in general and computational social science, is that in social science, the way that I make sense of the world around me is by immersing myself and attempting to empathize based on what I think people want or what they need, and how they believe the world should work. So the example is that I can come to Colin and say, Colin, when last did you put in fuel in your car? And then did you immediately from the car drive to the airport? And at what point? And how many Ubers did you order in the last month? And how many times did you buy food? How many times have you done anything? You realize very quickly that humans never memorize those things because it's a forgotten action, because it's mostly embedded and it's mostly really just fine-grained evidence of the real things you care about. So in our world, we see that spend becomes evidence of behavior that can drive interventions. So now imagine that you are a banker and your primary role is to engage with Colin at all costs and make sure that I can sell him the next loan, I can get you to use your credit card more, I can get you to perform any number of actions. Because it's so costly to pick up the phone and phone Colin plus 1, 3, 5, 10, 50 million of my other customers, I need to find a way to intelligently make sense of who you are in that financial ecosystem. So the only way to make sense of that is to have some kind of humanistic or behavioral framework that you can work from. So computational social science is entirely based on the actual evidence that you leave behind, not on what you want the world to see about your existence. So maybe an example for everybody is like a thinking hook. If you go to a restaurant and you get into your car and you realize that you're out of fuel and you stop at a fuel station and then you're on your way to go somewhere, you don't jump on TikTok and make a video about every one of your actions and what you paid and what the experience was. You don't, go onto Instagram in most cases on almost any of those kind of situations until it's extraneous. So that means that your social media trail is a complete kind of almost like a fake representation of what you think the world should be, where your money trail is the actual evidence of what you are doing. It tells you an enormous amount about a person moving around the world, traveling, the kind of things that you get involved in, the experiences that you are willing to endure, or how you partake in various actions, essentially describes your existence. So maybe just the last comment about this is that we kind of see this in 3 pillars if you had to look at the broader humanities and where your algorithms should fit. And what we've been attempting to solve is first and foremost understanding the individual. And can we theorize, or can we find ways that we can have a theoretical backbone that we can test through various hypotheses about you as an individual? So can I find the correlation between Colin's behaviors, Colin's actions, and why he had a challenge with his particular financial service? And then the question is, can I automate it? The other part of it is, can I understand the collective? The collective is, if I had to think of the money in, money out cycle, and I think of you in your family, or you in your work situation, or you in your friend's situation, or your sports situation, whatever that might be, you always find yourself integrated socially. Humans are essentially social beings. So that means that the personality needs to determine if Colin is with a group of people, he never spends money, but you know that he is in some situation because you could see that at some point every other period, that might be every other week, whatever it might be, you pick up the bill and somebody else picks up the bill in the meantime that you might not know about. But you want to understand who is in that proximity and who is in that vicinity, and who are you willing to share financial relationships with. Now, the third part is to make sense of the society. So can I reliably form an opinion, an anthropological opinion about how money moves, let's say ritualistically in a certain region? So in the US, if you think about it right now, you're sitting during the summer season, you got cyclone season, you got weather patterns, and at the same time, you might have your family around and the like, leading all the way up to, and if you think about 4th of July, all the way up to, let's say, Thanksgiving and so on. So that means there are rituals that are quite specific to how you then shift your spending, where in, let's say in some African regions, you got, the December period is everything changes, where you've got, the April period that might get people to visit friends in other countries and the like. So that just means that you want to have a way to interpret your entire client base's behaviors without having to go through the complexity of understanding each one individually. You want to assign a score, if you can do it reliably, that can adjust your behavior so that it looks like it's highly personalized and customized. But you've got an algorithm that can calculate that for you. And I think that, I'm not sure that explains it well enough, but that is essentially how we interpret what that personality then eventually is and what it will be used for.
So maybe Giuseppe, maybe give us an example of this. So I mean, we're talking about a very specific use case, I guess, a real-time, I don't know, inference engine, a recommendation engine, where by my actions being ingested into a platform with other data sets, you're going to try to determine my next behaviors and give some sort of changes in how you interact with me so that you can improve the expected outcomes, either from a client perspective, to get a better net promoter score, from a sales perspective, from a pricing perspective. Have you got some good user cases where this is, because it sounds really complicated. I mean, it sounds a lot more complicated than a TikTok algorithm where you just swipe up and down. You've got so much data that you need to bring in here.
Yeah, there are a number of use cases, but a couple very pertinent ones that come to mind are things like shifts in the pattern of the personality scores, right? And so if someone is starting to, maybe they started scoring very consistently as, for example, what we call an intentional personality, an intentional person that, very deliberately does certain things in a very methodical, very predictable manner, starts to shift. Their personality starts to shift more towards the experiential. And again, these scores are spectrums, right? So you don't have one score, you have scores across the multiple categories of personalities. And so for each given personality, you have a range, you have a score that sits within a range effectively. So what if one of your scores, your experiential score starts creeping up a little bit? That might tell us a little bit more about something that's potentially changing within your lifestyle that may dictate something else. Now, the score is often best used in conjunction with other points of information and other data, but that might trigger some sort of promotion to a credit card, let's say, that's travel oriented, or something that starts to probe at whether or not this individual maybe is going through some sort of life phase where now they're shifting, right? Maybe they feel more comfortable in their earnings or their career, and they're starting to pursue the travel that they always wanted to pursue. That might be a good opportunity to create a promotion, cross-sell some sort of one of the banking products that might be appropriate to this individual. And similarly, you can think of the spectrum of products that a typical bank would offer, whether it's revolving credit like a credit card, or more permanent line of credit for buying a home. And so to the extent that you can start to rely on, for example, shifts in the scores of spending personality, then you might be able to detect better and personalize what you're doing to this individual at the moment where it's most appropriate to do it. Another case, that I think even easier to wrap your mind around is just simply the language. Let's say you don't want to go to that level of sophistication. You just want to shape the language because you believe that everybody responds to different types of messaging. And if they are an intentional person, for example, that person that's very deliberate and just does things very methodically, that they don't want to read, a very long email. Maybe in conjunction with the marketing team, it's determined that for this type of personality, the right type of message is more concise and it's more deliberate in its language. Then you shape the language accordingly. And then with the scores in hand, you start to segment the way you're using your messaging and languages around either promotions or other things to these individuals in a way that's appropriate. And very closely related to that would be how you're offering the navigation on the app, let's say, or the website. And to the extent that someone is experiential, they might want to see lots of the promotions and offers of 5% cash back on Expedia or some partner where, and that individual is actually seeking that type of information, or you have good evidence because, again, from the personality perspective, their score is suggestive that this is the type of person that would want that. Whereas if you had presented a static approach to the website and just thrown everything in the kitchen sink in, your intentional person might be very turned off and frustrated by going to the website, seeing all kinds of things that they feel are irrelevant, and then being frustrated where, and It's a standard tactic, right, that we see in enterprise settings and in banking where every opportunity to sell or inform should be utilized. But again, there's no nuance to that if you're just using a sledgehammer and just blanketing everyone in your customer base with the same thing. To the extent that it's nuanced and personalized, your customers end up being happier. And then you can, as Jay used a good word earlier, intervene at the moment or at the moments where you're likely to be more successful in presenting either offers or cross sell or whatever you're trying to do.
How nuanced can you actually get, Jay?
Yeah, can I maybe give a quick also tag on to that and how nuanced you might want to get? Let's just think about the kind of behavior for a moment, and everybody can do this mental test themselves. Do you remember which credit card you loaded onto your Uber app and why you decided to pick that one? Do you remember the last time you went and purchased food, why you picked the card that you did or the account that you did? So that means that embeddedness versus front of wallet problems are enormous challenges for banks. So that means that how do I make you aware cognitively and make sure that I've created enough interest that you have a reason to pick me for what you need to pick me for. So think about how these problems are typically solved to get you to be aware of what I need to offer you. Go back to Giuseppe's comment around the blanket approach and a generic approach. There's a common belief that everything should be consistently the same. All messages must be equal. All customers must be, dear valued customer, please use this. But we all know that we have been educated on every single platform that we engage in, that it converges around our own options, behaviors, preferences, and the like. Even if it gets it wrong, we know that it attempts. So if you go to your TikTok and you swipe in any way you like, you know that it attempts to satisfy you. If you go to Pinterest, it attempts to find the item that is most relevant to you. And if you go to Instagram or any of your channels, if you go to Google and you type in a search phrase, you expect a result that at least relates to the option that you are searching for. So that means we have been educated that things must be fairly unique to us, even if it's not entirely unique. It doesn't have to be. So now in the context of the banking situation, there's an enormous opportunity to capture that bidirectional relationship of a person engaging with transactions and eventually then accessing various interaction points or touch points with a business that is, as we all know, generally known as channels. But a person in the street, you and I are using our banking services day by day, don't think, oh, let me contact the bank through their telephony channel. Let me contact the bank through their mobile channel. We don't think like that. We think of convenience, least amount of obstacles, easiest way to engage, or whatever the bank has programmed me to believe the easiest option is. Now the question is, can you make an assumption that Colin and Giuseppe and Jay are exactly the same people? Can you make an assumption that we use our digital channels the same? Maybe we like to speak on the phone differently. Maybe we like the text message from time to time. Maybe we like whatever it is. So how can we implement something that can be quite unique, but not totally unique so that it creates a sense of a creepy relationship? Because everybody is quite scared of hyper-personalization to some extent. But you want a model to deal with your financial life intelligently. So maybe one last kind of, if you take this example this into the next step, and I'm a bank, and I want to know if you are truly engaged with me as your financial provider. So let's take a scenario in the real life scenario. Can we make an assumption that if you as a customer never buys food, that you are not eating? No, you can't. All that you know is that they're probably spending it in some other way. So they could either do it through cash, so you could see the cash in, cash out cycle, or they do it with a competitive card or a competitive account. So that means that what is that worth to you to get that person to engage in essential activities? And then by the time they engage in essential activities, can they get into a point where they show all of their extroversion related activities, things like attending movies or going entertainment or doing certain kinds of travel? And that means that you can automate the nudging, the engagement, the messaging, the sales process to a large degree, because I get to know your personality and I know that it's pointless to keep on promoting the generic message because you are already engaged in having your card linked to Uber and your card, you buy food already and so on. Why do I want to talk to you about that more I want to speak to you about the things that you're not doing with me. And I want to do it on a spectrum. So I want to know, have I collected enough evidence of that personality style of behavior that I know how I can get a dynamic engine to experiment, to engage with you, to learn more about you automatically. And I think that is the key trick, is that a lot of these algorithms can be implemented manually. It can be done by your behavioral economist or by your computational social scientist or whoever you got on staff. They can work on it and they can work on solving some of these problems. And we all do that all the time. I mean, that's what you already do in a bank. You segment and you attempt to find, but how do you scale it? And how do you scale it reliably? That you are going to get to those people who normally might feel not included, and do it in a way that you can drive some kind of engagement cycle. So I think that's a large part of, the kind of backing to this. Maybe just one last kind of comment on this is that if I'm now, and let's take one of the scenarios that, and actually Giuseppe and I've been playing this out with some partners. If I'm a private banker and I deal with, let's say, the middle tier and above, and maybe even in some cases the high net worth or a family office, wherever it might be, and I've got a portfolio of 100, 200, 300, whatever the size of my portfolios of customers that I need to talk to. And I spoke to you the last time when Colin phoned me 5 months ago about some situation, and now you phoned me and said, don't you remember me? Of course not, because I've had hundreds of other conversations in the meantime. Depending on how big the issue was, there might be some cognition, there might be some shift in behavior. Now just imagine that agent sitting in front of a chat interface because they don't know what questions are going to come their way from their customers. And Colin says, listen, I'm trying to get some traveling organized. I want to be able to get my family onto some new plan. I want to be able to get some cards sorted out. And before they even start talking to you, they engage with a conversational engine that gives them the answers based on your actual scores, not based on what a generative model dictates, but it morphs it into a knowledge base that then gives you an answer to that agent that can then still represent you or represent some story to you based on intelligence that they've gained. So that means they don't have to go and sift through or scan through months and months of your transactions and trying to see how many times have you traveled, when did you book what kind of ticket, when did you go to what kind of show, when did you eat food, when did you go to restaurants, whatever you have done, the score encapsulates that. And then when you ask, let's say, a conversational engine, it can give that person a recommendation that embeds that intelligence without having to go through all of that detail analytic. It will already determine that personality and can give them an antidote or some kind of explanation as to how to deal with that. So that's, yeah.
You say, imagine this as a scenario. How far away are we from that being a scenario?
It's current reality. So it is implemented as we speak. So there are a number of options that you can take in this implementation. And if you think about, in our world, we pride ourselves on implementation, execution, intelligence. So that means not just talking about these ideas, but to make them work on the ground, to get them implemented. And in this case, the spend personality and the related research over the last many waves of us doing that, we've done it with various sizes of financial institutions across various geographical regions. We've been testing the model in various kinds of settings in different parts of the world, so Giuseppe, New York, and other parts of the world. So that means there are different ways in which we've been testing that. We've already created a conversational integration so that if you go to, let's say, OpenAI's custom GPTs and you search for ecosystem AI, you'll see that there are a number of GPTs we publish publicly for people to essentially have a conversation with the GPT to explain to you how to implement this kind of solution. So if you have a value proposition or you have a particular problem statement that says that I want to understand my customers better, more reliably, consistently, I want to be able to speak to them in an intelligent way without making mistakes. And that's often the issue why we're trying to standardize communication in banking. Can I, at some point, predict when they're going to be leaving me or when they're going to be churning? And the classical churn problem is an example. People think it's a data science problem. It's not. It's a human behavioral problem. By the time you've churned and you're gone, there might have been evidence months before you left that I should have engaged with you. And we found that especially the spend personality, what we call personality drift, is a very key indicator to show that you have now moved into some new state of how you use me as your financial provider. And even if I want to maintain my relationship with you over time? How do I speak to you? What is that? And one of the algorithms that fits into the Sven personality is called the sentimental equilibrium. What is that pace of communication, the style of language that I need to use to keep you engaged? Because if you think about it historically, how banks work is that if you don't use a card or you don't perform transactions, nobody contacts you. Let's say that you don't pay a fee for 1 month. You have emails, text messages, call center agents, everybody phoning to collect that $6 that you owe on your fees, where it's an opportunity lost. Because the way that the bank makes money, or an institution that drives any transactional relationship, is through driving continuous engagement. It's not just about the fee that you pay on that particular financial service. It's about the fact that you keep on spending, and there are transactional flow that generates your non-interest revenue line. So that means that if that is in your interest, can you automate that at scale? And that's how we think about it. So that practical implementation, client-facing, means that it's probably an API onto an app that will drive offers or recommendations or something to the client directly if it's an external entity. If it's internal, can I get the agent enabled to have more intelligent conversations with whatever the financial situation is that I'm having a conversation about? So that's how we see that.
Giuseppe, are you seeing a lot of demand for this across financial institutions, particularly in the US, or are you simply seeing lots of financial institutions talking about this and thinking about it, but the implementations and actually actioning on this aren't necessarily as successful as Jay's implying?
Yeah. So I think what a lot of institutions are talking about, and I'm going to put aside generative AI at the moment because everybody's talking about that as a first order priority. But in terms of this space, what everybody is talking about more is the personalization narrative. And so that narrative has a lot of traction. And whether you're looking at on the consultant side of the equation, or even places like IBM or the providers in the space of either customer data platforms or CRM systems, everybody is very much interested in this personalization narrative, the next best action type narrative where, at the end of the day, everyone acknowledges that, because at the end of the day, we ourselves, if you're in a banking setting or not, are consumers of, this is one of the most heavily consumed services in the entire enterprise sector, if not the most, right? Everybody has to deal with money at some stage of their life. And so there definitely is an acknowledgement out there that this is important, that personalization, or hyper personalization, the way it's been being termed now, to distance it from prior personalization techniques that involved, demographic segmentation and trying to put people into buckets. But there's been very little discussion or intuition around using artificial intelligence for this, because the intersection with behavioral social science and machine learning and artificial intelligence it's there, and it's in fact what Jay and the team are doing is in fact a good example of that intersection. It's nascent, and so from that perspective, this does become potentially a first mover advantage for firms that are willing to extend the capability set into looking at techniques like this and potentially integrating them with generative, which is something we've done heavily with, for example, spending personality, because now you have both this natural language capability of either interacting with your algorithm, the spending personality scores, or you have the ability to create language on the fly, right? There's so many other dimensions that generative opens up to this particular type of technology and technique. But by and large, you don't see a lot of what I would call behavioral intelligence efforts that are out there. And part of it's a regulatory constraint, if you will, right? There's hesitation on the part of banks to run too far, too fast. But at least here in the US, I think what's the case, and I'm guessing, educated guessing, that this is the case elsewhere, the last 20 years were very much regulatory heavy. And so data, the way it's collected, the way it's stored, all of the banks invested heavily in this mindset of collecting the data, getting it in the right spot, making sure it's secure, and doing all these sort of housekeeping chores. And so financial services banking are very much in pole position, I would say, relative to some other industry sectors, as being in a good position to now take this additional step and say, okay, um, what's behavioral artificial intelligence look like? If I wanted to go down this path, what are the tools, techniques, models, insights that I would potentially pursue? But I think we're very much at a nascent stage, right? The things that have been implemented or are implementing are follow-ons from what you see in the consumer side, like the recommenders and things that you find at Netflix. There's been an interest, I think, to copy that and see, okay, that seems to work. Why can't we do it in the banking setting? But it doesn't, it's not as portable as you might think, right? When you're on Netflix, you're actively engaging with the media, with the interface quite a bit, and sharing as a result a lot of evidence as to what you might be interested in. On the banking side, if you get a credit card, you do that once, right? Clicking around multiple types of cards is not something you're going to do outside of maybe the initial search phase and securing a card. But what does happen, and why that something like spending personality as far as behavioral intelligence goes is useful, is once you have the card, the data or the evidence that's useful is how you're using it, and not so much what you're doing within the app or things on the banking side. So it's this unique opportunity to squeeze into this behavioral intelligence lane in the banking setting in a way that has a really rich data set by individual that's very clean, right? You think about all the issues that come with pursuing these types of projects on the data science side or the machine learning or artificial intelligence side. Usually the biggest hurdle is the data. Transaction data is standardized, or can be standardized much more easily. It's not, walk in the park per se, but that's easier than a bunch of unstructured information that you might get from observing other types of behaviors when you're interested in behavioral intelligence, like Instagram profiles. And I've heard some banks like wanting to mine like Instagram profile, or not Instagram, but social media. So maybe Instagram, but others, as potential evidence for behavioral intelligence purposes. But as Jay was talking about earlier, you curate, that's the front of the house, right? What's in the house is not necessarily something you're gonna tell people. That's the front lawn, if you will. That's what you keep, that's what you present to the world, as opposed to actually the inner workings of your household.
So Jay, welcome to your brother, by the way. We don't have a picture for the other Jay Von Zell, but I'm sure we'll get one soon. So in my mind, let's make this practical. Hey everyone, I'm Colin, I'm 40. I might be a little bit older, but I'm pretending to be 40. Let's assume there's some very similar Colins who are also pretending to be 40. We're all going off to the airport. I've got my phone, they've got their phone. We've both geolocated that information. We've got both an account with a certain bank. Maybe we're going to the airport. And it's picked up by the platform that there's some sort of movement going on here. You've got the transaction records with different types of transactions and interests. How does that journey go differently for both of us, just in a snapshot, or to start that off? Are you going to be messaging me as the realization? It's an insurance product for Colin. I'm an intentional buyer. You can see this from the previous profiles. There's nothing funny that's needed here. You're just going to hit me with a very short message saying, are you off to XYZ? We know you normally go to Cape Town. There we go. For the other Colin, it's slightly different because there are other factors there. Maybe he's more experimental. He wants to shop around. He wants to learn more. He wants to participate. It's a call center agent that actually makes the phone call there because it's is that the sort of thing we're talking about here? I think you're on mute. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, you're muted.
All the scenarios you mentioned, we have dealt with. So if you think about it, just maybe let's think of the three pillars for a moment: individual, collective, society. So let's say that you want to take a risk-averse decision first. We're going to make assumption that all experiential personalities must be treated similarly. So rather than finding out if you are traveling to a certain destination or geospatially locating you or anything of the sort. I just take your initial score to alter the language that I use, the example you use now. So I can use what's called a message recommender, or some way in which I can do a next best action that might guide a person to phone you or whatever that might be. And there is a sequence of actions that we normally talk to, and we're not going to have time today to discuss that. But for those who are interested, can maybe just contact us. We can share those with you. But there's essentially a sequence of, we normally find the kind of 2 plus many. The first 2 is to make sure that we can categorize your life reliably. We can use our algorithm to assist with that. And then the algorithm applies the base scoring to that particular individual and that collective if the evidence is enough. So that means that we use an entropy score to calculate if we have collected enough evidence about your transactional behavior to give you a score. If that score is too low and we say that we have not collected enough evidence, you then run a pre-trained model that we supply to provide you with an initial indicative score, from which we will then continuously evaluate if that is actually the correct way to engage with you on. And that means that there's a third approach, and that is the dynamic experimentation-based approach, where just to make sure that your model that you use in your institution is calibrated, I want to keep on trying out different things with you. I want to test that if you an intentional, I want to try something else, I want to be able to push you into different directions and then learn from how you respond to those. So for us, the essence of this entire process is to create a learning experience that's automated. So that means that, can I engage with you consistently and learn on your feedback through the interventions, and then have a model automatically converge around those decisions that normally would have had to be taken by many humans. So it doesn't mean that the human relationship goes away. In actual fact, it just gets amplified, because now that human who's going to talk to you, and that's why I log in with a second J, as if anybody wants to see, maybe I can just quickly show what it looks like if somebody had to ask it questions and maybe see what it does.
Yeah, let's have a look.
Okay, so let's do that. So let me I'll share my screen. I'll probably just do the entire screen. It's, I think, easier to do that. So let's just take this out of the way. So in this case, if you just think of this scenario for a second, is that in the ecosystem platform, there are behind the scenes a bunch of modules that essentially have the spend personality implemented. And what we've done is we've taken the scores, we've ingested the transactional data, we've generated the scores, and there's a number of different ways in which you can engage with it. So let's say that we have gone through that exercise and it's already done. And now what I want to do is I want to be able to talk to it. So on OpenAI, here's kind of this one example. You can run this entirely in your private environment too, so you can have a conversation with the data and the scores. So this is to understand these personalities. And I already know a couple of customer numbers, so I'll just use them if you had to ask a question. So I'll ask for, what is the spend personality customer 590? The idea is that it needs to go and access the backend and make sure that the scores gets ingested and get integrated. So when we confirm the actions, the backend engine that has run the algorithm now can morph those scores into some kind of chat interface. And if you think about it, this particular customer 590 is mostly considered to be industrious. So that means industrious, they focus on productivity, allocating resource toward work life and personal efficiency. So you'll see they probably spend a lot of money. And even in some cases, if you think of the way that you spend with pharmacies or wellness products and the like, can give you some kind of score. If I now want to look for customer 851's spend personality, every time you do this, you could obviously, depending on who the person is doing this kind of activity, what they're allowed to see and which customers they're allowed to see. That's the security framework gets deployed on your cloud backend. So in this case, it tells me that this particular customer 851 is industrious. So industrious in this setting is that they focus towards work-life efficiency as well. So anything that's got to do with productivity. If I want to compare these two and explain how to communicate with them, what happens is that the backend is prepared already to make sure that these kind of answers can be given reliably because it understands the difference between the different theoretical constructs. So in this case, it shows a score, and then it will say that 590's predominant traits is extroversion, industrious. So focus on your social and active engagement, highlight events, social gatherings, activities, use vibrant engagement messagings to appeal to this extroverted nature, where customer 851 is focused on highlight practical benefits and productivity, and make sure that you provide detailed information about the products that you're going to talk to them about, where the first customer is more interested in how great they're going to feel, where this particular customer is more interested in the facts and what they're going to get from a benefit point of view. So that means
now, if you automate this, Jay, if you automate this and take it away from a call agent who's working this out as a kind of like a much better version of a CRM, and we're now running this at scale, and you've got thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of customers with different messaging, different colloquialisms, maybe even different languages, different lengths, different timings, so it's coming over in different days, in different environments, and 1,001 of the differences that I can't even imagine but can be automated. What gives you the sense, how do you actually get the sense that this is working? Where do you, as a bank, can see, how do you actually determine that you're making real inroads in this space?
I think that the way we've been looking at it is this making money, saving money, protecting money is three dimensions that are used for KPIs. So the KPI on making money is, can I get to leads more effectively? And can I do it within the velocity of activity that I'm currently performing? Can I get those leads converted to make sure that they engage with me? Can I, once they engage with me, can I activate them? Can I get them to use me continuously? So can I increase my continuous consumption, my continuous activity on my card? Can I reduce my churn? So what we often find is that because there's a broad spectrum of measures, you have to pick typically initially one of those angles and focus on that first, just to make sure that you can contain your risk. And because we've designed it in a way that it can be seen as an adjacency, it means that you can spin it up with access to the transaction without affecting your current live banking system, payment switch, or marketing campaigns, unless you want that to do that. So you could set up, and especially in a kind of spending-based environment, you can set up a digital twin to start understanding if the behaviors that it's predicting will fit into the kind of language we normally would want to use to get closer to customers or to convince leads to become customers to drive that. So the saving money is when you want to use it to drive automatic messaging and other kinds of capabilities to stop a person from, let's say, churning or get them to start using what you need to use, and do it through, normally it would be done through a back office or middle back office in a bank with an enormous amount of effort. In this case, can this score be generated, added to my current customer base, run on a daily basis to assist with the selection and clustering criteria as to who I should be talking to in what way. And then that means that making your internal process more efficient. So that's what we call saving money. And in protecting money, we have seen examples where clients have used it to determine if your shift in your personality might be a fraudulent set of activities. And as you know, card fraud, transactional fraud is an enormous problem for everybody. And you often will see that like this $1 problem is a kind of a common thing. People charge $1 to your account, the next minute they run through the $3,000 on your card because they've been able to get through whatever the paywall is that they need to get through. So that just means that these behaviors can fairly quickly show up that under normal conditions you would not have seen it. So can you move from a purely rule-based, a lot of the way the fraud is detected, into something that is personality drift-based? So you could see how those changes then happen over time. Yeah. So those are maybe just some of the examples.
Yeah, just to add a little bit to that, Colin and Jay, one of the first things out of the gate that would probably make sense to do with the scores is to simply do analytics, right? And look at the spending personality scores and the segments, what product uptake, what products are these individuals utilizing, what velocity, is the velocity appropriate? And then with that baseline, then those KPIs that Jay mentioned are much easier to frame and to measure against, to say, okay, it looks like the industrious folks are not consuming this product as frequently as some others. Is that systemic? Is that just a condition of this type of, or people with this type of personality tend to not? Or is there something, maybe if we shift the language, right? You can then take these strategic approaches along with the experimentation. Not that you'd want to, again, do all of them at once, but you would strategically go in and say, what's our hypothesis? If we adjust our language, we can correct this deficiency, or we find that as an example, the experiential people tend to accept the credit card offer, but never end up using the card. Okay, why? And and if we would detect that's different, right? The industrious people instead show very good usage of the card upon acceptance of the offer. And that might inform then your marketing strategy to say there's something that we need to do here to activate, right, these individuals upon accepting the offer. Now, what could that be, right? And you might not have the exact answer right out of the gate, but you might employ strategy at that point. So the KPIs are nested and integrated with other strategic adjustments. But having this dimension is massive, even just if that's the only thing you were to do with it, right? Is just inform sort of high level strategic marketing or channel strategies or growth marketing strategies. Right there, you would get, in my opinion, a lift strategically because you just have a level of intelligence about your customers on a at scale. It's a dimension you just don't have. And frankly, it's a dimension, again, going back to your earlier question, psychographics. Everybody thinks psychographics is useful. But if you go poke around out there and say, okay, I agree. I think psychographics is really important. How do I do it? And you get some guides, but there's no systematic or data-driven approach to psychographics that's ubiquitous or generally adopted across the board because I think until now we just didn't necessarily have some of the techniques or insights. And AI and machine learning is in fact the big data in conjunction with that, the data quality. A lot of things had to come together, but I think that psychographics dimension that's just been discussed for years and years really is going to take a lot more shape here going forward and really could be the source of huge competitive advantage, I think.
How do you determine which sorts of companies are going to benefit from this? I know that you've got your specific niche which you focus on, but what kind of markers for people when they're thinking about this should they be really thinking about?
I could go first. Giuseppe, you can fill in a gap afterwards.
Yeah.
The way we've been looking at it is that if you are a transactional based organization and you engage continuously with a consumer, a client, or a customer in some kind of situation where you can abstract that behavior, our behavioral algorithms can work. That means that if you go to the way you listen to music, the way you consume Netflix, the way you consume any of your other digital media, and especially on your digital channels, each of those have got a slightly different personality style. And we design those with clients, and that means that you want to do that from scratch. If you want to use research we've already gone through and we've implemented and we've tested over and over again, like the spend personality, it means that you have transactions that you are engaging with on a continuous basis with your customer, and you are incentivized to keep them spending with you and not with somebody else. This is the absolute essence of how you can increase your financial performance. If you are a specialized provider, and let's say you only provide cards for agriculture, for travel, or whatever the issuing agreement is, it can also be used for that. So you can then decide that the anchor relationship is that anybody, if you've got a travel card with an airline, I want people to buy the airline tickets with me. I want them to spend in places that is important for me with the agreement I might have with my banking provider, depending on who that is, as a person who's going to provide a different issuing option. So we're going to see that anybody in that spectrum are the immediate beneficiaries of this. And then there are options on the periphery that maybe we can discuss at a different session.
All right, we've got 1 minute left, and so we've got one more question I want to cover. I'll close out so that people that do dial off before I ask this question are aware. Please just drop me a note after the session with your thoughts about the content. I'm particularly interested to know what questions you walk away with which have been unanswered, where you'd like more information. You obviously haven't taken the time to dial into this to learn Nout. So I really would appreciate if you could send through any specific areas that you would like us to go and follow up on. We're very happy to arrange future calls. So with that, I just want to go and ask the one question that we did get from the audience from David George there, Giuseppe, about what if the private individuals continue to push back? How much? How likely is that? What is your perception about where regulation is going in the US? I've got my views, but I think yours will be more accurate.
Yeah, no, there's understandably and on some level appropriately, there is concern about data privacy, um, how data gets used, how data gets collected on individuals. Just recently, Google, who had committed to deprecating cookies, so these cookies that are sit in your browser and follow you along and basically track what you're looking at. It's old. It's been around for a very long time now and collected all of our footprints and fingerprints, if you will. Now Google has realized that there is such a dependence on this in the marketing technology world, they've scrapped the plan altogether. So cookies stay. But if you looked at what people were talking about in terms of replacing cookies, they were talking about techniques like spending personality, where the spending personality approach is to basically not identify the underlying individual in from a transactional perspective, right? And so then the question becomes, is it appropriate to market to someone in a personalized way? And I think the answer to that is yes. And if someone opts out of marketing altogether and says, listen, don't bother me, that stands, right? And that's appropriate and will be the way. But then the question is, if you've elected for me to, if you're okay with me marketing to you, right? You haven't opted out of that. Would you prefer that I personalize it or not? Right. And I think we know what the likely answer is there. Most people are going to say, if you're going to send me something, I would hope that it's a little bit more tailored to who I am as an individual. That's on the one dimension. The other dimension is the data wars and the increased scrutiny on that in the aggregate. And I'm not gonna try to dive into that one because that's also very murky here in the US. But there will be growing awareness of this issue as basically we look at the advancements in AI and we come to the realization, which is a realization that the practitioners had for a long time, that you can basically train a model for everything, right? And it may not be a good model, but you can think of any possibility. And if you get data or you find evidence or you create a good sort of theoretical framework, there's likely some sort of algorithmic approach to train a model that can learn what that is. And so you can imagine now what's going to happen on this data front going forward. So I would imagine we're going to see a lot more on this point as time goes on.
Well, look, maybe just one last comment. I know we over time, but wellness and financial literacy and financial engagement, that whole field going to benefit from this enormously. So when I opt in to get the bank to assist me, to guide me through pre-delinquencies or financial troubles or whatever it might be, that spend personality is enormously telling, even to the customer, as to how their behaviors are playing out in their financial spend without having to go and do detail analytic. So we have seen clients using it for that purposes too. And that is one of the primary cases for this.
Jay, thank you very much. I wasn't going to be able to stop you from talking about that anyway. I know you too well, Giuseppe. Thank you very much. And to Dana, thank you. And please, like I said, drop us a note with questions and themes that you want to be covered in future webinars. With that, I wish you all a fantastic rest of Wednesday, wherever you are in the world. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Alan.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, buddy. Cheers.